Beginnings are full of promise, endings full of memories, and Speed's coverage of Formula One, 16 years ago so rich with promise, is today even richer in memories. In this next 60 minutes, Speed's crew takes you back through the highlights of those years, the technical innovation, the wild rides and close calls, the intrigue, the surprises, and the great stories which have made Formula One so fascinating to us all.
But he hangs on.
Good gracious!
That was a champion's try. Fantastic.
One final time from our Speed Studios in Charlotte, North Carolina, we welcome you to a very special edition of Formula One Debrief. Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Varsha with our regular cast of characters. From my left, David Hobbs, Steve Matchett, Will Buxton, and Sam Posey. In the next hour, we'll try to take you through 17 years of Formula One here on Speed. Obviously, we can't hit every high point, but we'll get to as many as we can. Now, obviously, the sport has changed an awful lot in the last 17 years, both the personalities that have come through it, the technology of the race cars, even the racetracks and the places they run around the world, even the way we cover it for television. And we'll try to touch on as many of those subjects as we can. Guys, let's start out with the one personality, I think, who encompasses everything we've done from the era of Senna, Mansell, and Prost to that of Alonso and Vettel and Hamilton, and that is Michael Schumacher. Steve, tell us about the driver you knew.
Well, you're right. He's been such a significant part of Formula One for so many years. He's become part of the furniture, quite frankly. It seems extraordinary that he's about to retire again for the second time in his career. Michael, to me, really encapsulates the changing of the guard from the old-style drivers, let's say, of a Prost and Senna, to a young guy who really embraced fitness. He was incredibly fit. I mean, when I first started racing and Michael joined Benetton very early in '91, we still had drivers that were smoking cigarettes. Can you imagine that? That's obviously gone out the window completely now, but we now have a driver in Michael Schumacher that understands the technology of the cars. He wanted to understand the engineering, and the cars have become more and more critical in terms of their engineering. And here was a guy that really embraced that, listened to his engineers, talked with his technical director, and we've seen the results. The most successful driver in terms of championships in the history of sport.
Well, now we've got Vettel coming along. How do you see him in comparison? A different kind of guy, both Germans, both very focused on what they do, but different characters.
Different, yeah. That's right, some different characters, although having spoken to some of the mechanics and engineers who have moved from Benetton in my era and are now racing at Red Bull, they say that they see in Sebastian Vettel those same traits of wanting to ingratiate himself into the team, to become a part of the team, an integral part of the team. They see the same traits in the young Vettel than they did now in the older statesman Michael Schumacher. So in a way, Vettel is an incredibly bright guy, there's no question about that, and obviously he and Michael talk a lot, and I think Michael has been giving him the lessons behind the scenes of how to become a great driver. It isn't all about what happens in the race car, as you know.
I think that's been one of the fascinating things about Formula One, as we've witnessed it on Speed, was that changing of the guard when Michael absolutely dominated in the late 90s and into the era of the 2000s. And then Fernando Alonso suddenly arose with the Renault team, the ex-Benetton squad that you worked with, Steve. And then finally to Sebastian Vettel, this inexorable sort of change that's a part of sport, I guess, as it is in life, David.
Well, of course, the championship this year came down to two guys, Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso, both of whom were going for 3 championships. But, of course, the big thing about Vettel was it's 3 championships in a row. And, of course, there's only 2 other people who've ever done that. Michael Schumacher, who we just talked about, did it 4 years in a row. And, of course, it was 60 years ago that one Manuel Fangio did 3 in a row. So Vettel has joined a very elite group of people there to not only win 3 championships, which in itself is a heck of a task, just ask Fernando Alonso this year, but to do it 3 times in a row, and the Constructors' Championship as well 3 times in a row. This guy is just, you know, he could rewrite those history books because he's significantly younger than Schumacher was when he had won his first 3 championships. So, I mean, who knows? I mean, good Lord, he could win 4 in a row, 5 in a row. I mean, just the way things are going at the moment. he looks pretty unbeatable.
Which is remarkable when you figure that back in the days of Mansell and Senna, guys were winning championships with several races to go in a season. But if you go back just the last 6 or 7 years, it seems like every year we've gone right to the end of the year, and there was 2 or 3 or even 4 in the case of 2010 drivers with a shot at a world championship.
Yeah, and Bernie Ecclestone's absolutely loving that. He seems to have that magic touch, pushes the button, the rain falls just when it's supposed to. But, you know, we're talking about these great champions, and these great champions, of course, have needed great cars. The story of the last 17 years hasn't just been about those drivers, it's been about great designers, likes of Adrian Newey, Rory Byrne in the Ferrari days. And Adrian Newey, once again, you know, he's been a story of those last 17 years, as have the other players, you know, throughout this sport. Every great champion needs a great rival. And for Michael Schumacher, you had Mika Häkkinen. Latterly, you had Fernando Alonso. Alonso has Vettel. Vettel has Alonso and Hamilton and Raikkonen. And for all of those greats the last 17 years, every great champion, I think, has needed not just a great car, but a great rival.
I think one of the things we're seeing at the moment, quite frankly, is we've got probably the best group of drivers that we have seen for a long time. And obviously, the old trio of McLaren, Ferrari and Williams has changed. We've now got to add Red Bull to that mix, so we've got more competitive cars than we've ever had before, and I think we've got a better field of drivers out there. You know, you've got Lewis Hamilton, you've got Jenson Button, you've got Michael, well, you don't have Michael Schumacher now, but Vettel and Alonso. I mean, these guys are all capable of being world champions, and I think it's very exciting for the future, there's no doubt about it.
Well, we have a field of former world champions driving. We're thinking back to Michael's reign in 92, 93. Alain Prost won the World Championship in 93, retires from the sport. We're going to 94, there wasn't a world champion on the grid. You know, so when you talk about the field of drivers and the class of drivers, now we've got drivers in good cars that know not just how to race or how to win races, but how to win world championships. And we're seeing great battles as a result of that.
Right, and it's one of the evolutions of the sport. One of the things we've tried to convey to fans over the years is that Formula One really is fundamentally a different kind of motorsport competition than anything else you're likely to find around your television dial, because the teams have to create their own cars. You cannot buy an off-the-shelf chassis and engine and away you go. And it seems that Formula One in this era has this level of competition because it's attracting the bright young skills, not only behind the wheel, but in the garage area and in the factories. It's tougher than ever to succeed in Formula One, and yet we seem to have more and more people capable of competing for it.
Well, look at the teams. They're much more equal than they used to be. Raikkonen would never have been seduced into coming back if it had been a second-rate team, but there was a first-rate team ready for him. And that's why the 6, 7 champions were able to confront each other in 1 year, because before that, there would have been only 2 cars or 4 at the very most that could have carried a man to a championship. Now, the field is much broader, the pyramid is much broader, and it's incredibly good racing, I think.
I tell you what I think has made a big difference, Bob, on that point that you're making about the closest of the race, and Sam also, is we've gone from the era of the brilliant single designer like a Chapman or a John Barnard. John Barnard, the man the man responsible for the first carbon fibre chassis, for example, and the first semi-automatic transmission. We've gone from that era to computer technology, and now there are a lot of really brilliant young designers and engineers coming out of university that understand how computer technology works, and all of a sudden we're seeing the cars starting to come together, and as you keep saying, David, in qualifying, there's hardly anything between them as a result of how close they are in terms of design.
We're going to take a break and return. Obviously, we've got lots to talk about in the next hour, so stay with us on this final edition of Formula One Debrief. When we return, we'll talk about some of the memorable moments on track over the last 17 years. We'll be right back.
That's Timo Glock! That's Timo Glock!
Wow, that is! Timo Glock has given up the position!
And that puts Hamilton up into 5th place, and he will come from behind to claim the world title.
My favourite Speed F1 memory has a theme of firsts to it, and it involves the Malaysian Formula One Grand Prix in 2003. That year was my first year here at Speed, and that event was my very first Formula One commentary with David and Steve here at Speed Channel. But it's also very special to me because I got to call Kimi Raikkonen's very first F1 victory, and to see what he went on to achieve and becoming a Formula One World Drivers' Champion, then going off to World Rally, having a couple of years away, and then coming back and finishing 3rd in this year's championship. Just that whole story, and that I was here at Speed and got to call that first victory, is very special to me. Something that's not all that special to me was the first time I got to pay for David Hobbs' wine bill.
You little twerp.
That, of course, is Lee Diffie, who will lead the American broadcast team in Formula One into the future. His favorite moment on track: unofficially, 26 different drivers won Formula One races during the Speed era of 17 years. 9 of them went on to win world championships, some of them multiple championships. Who has a favorite moment they'd like to talk about? Will, how about you?
Okay, threefold really over the last 16, 17 years. The first was Damon Hill, so nearly winning the Hungarian Grand Prix in 1997. He was a big hero of mine as a child, leaving Williams to go to the dreadful car that was the Arrows in 1997, so nearly winning that race. I think encapsulated so much of what Formula One is, that sometimes a driver can overcome his equipment. The second one for me was Brazil in 2008, and not for the reason that you're thinking of, but for Felipe Massa being so gracious in defeat, for pumping his fist against his chest, and really at that time, just your heart broke for him. And I think the nation's heart broke for him, and the crowd's heart broke for him. And my final one was just this year in Abu Dhabi, Sebastian Vettel coming from the back of the field not once but twice to position himself on the podium. And the look on Fernando Alonso's face of, what on earth are you doing here? I think really showed Sebastian Vettel. There was a moment for me where Sebastian Vettel stopped being good and became great, and really shut up all his detractors who said he couldn't overtake.
Well, my moment is another Sebastian Vettel moment. He was described as the guy that could only win races from the front. And then at Monza, he made that incredible pass a couple of years ago on Alonso on the outside, partly in the dirt. Now, when you have a car going 180, 190 miles an hour, the control of the car is much tougher than it is at lower speeds. You have no throttle control. I mean, he was right on the absolute edge, and he had to trust Alonso as well as his own instincts of keeping the car on the road. I think that was a moment of mastery that really cemented Vettel as an all-arounder.
Well, I have to say that one of mine is the first year we were on Speed Vision then, was when Michael had gone to Ferrari, which was pretty down. I mean, they hadn't won a championship since 1979. And he went to the team, and we all thought, wow, why has he left Benetton? He just won 2 world championships. Why on earth would we go to Ferrari, except for the usual reason everybody wants to drive a Ferrari?
The company car.
And exactly. A company car, yeah. It's nice to take home to the missus. Not very good for shopping. But in the rain in Spain, I mean, he qualified, I don't know where he was, like 3rd or 4th, 5th. And he just drove. I mean, it was an unbelievable display of wet weather driving. I mean, there were some laps where he was like 5 seconds quicker on that lap than anybody else in the field. And I mean, he just walked it. And to me, I still just couldn't believe how anybody could drive like that in the rain. That to me is a massive memory.
It's cemented. I think that drive you're talking about with Schumacher in the wet for Ferrari cemented his desire to turn Ferrari around.
Absolutely.
In exactly the same way that we see Alonso now taking the F2012 by the scruff of the neck. He did exactly the same with the Ferrari back in 1996. My 2 memories that stick out for me, one is also a 1996 memory, but it involves, again, the changing of the guard, but the changing of guard from Benetton, as we've just been talking about, when Michael left. And it was at Melbourne when Jean Alesi ran out of fuel at the Australian Grand Prix. We had lost Michael Schumacher, who had gone to Ferrari, and we had inherited Berger and Alesi from Ferrari. And we were kind of thinking, well, I wonder how this is going to turn out for us. The first race, Jean Alesi claims that the radio wasn't working. We could never find a fault with it. And dear old Jean Alesi ran out of fuel and forgot to come in for his pit stop to be refueled. So, I mean, we even had the chief mechanic hanging over the pit wall with the board saying, pit now, you're going to run out of fuel. Ignored it, ran out of fuel, stopped on track. So I mean, there was that somewhat surreal moment, really. This is Benetton of the new era. And of course, not long after that, Benetton of the new era collapsed completely. And my other memory takes off something you were talking about, Sam, earlier on, and another Ferrari memory, and it is Vettel having had success at Monza and joining Alonso on the podium at Monza with that sea of scarlet out ahead of them. And Alonso tapped Vettel on the shoulder and kind of pointed out there and said, do you see this? You see this? And all of a sudden you saw that look a different look come into Vettel's eyes. And at that point, I still hold it true now. At that point, Vettel had decided, you know, one day I will be driving at Ferrari. He wants it.
And I would like to have seen Vettel's eyes just this last race in Brazil when he was headed backwards.
Oh, boy.
Half the field was bearing down on him. That was a look that we would love to have seen. I imagine they might have been about this big.
Yeah, and came back to clinch his championship a couple of places despite that and the changing conditions and the radio breaking and everything else. That was a great moment for Sebastian Vettel. Mine will be forever the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix in Interlagos, where Felipe Massa did everything he could in the Ferrari, won his home Grand Prix, but then Lewis Hamilton came through and made the pass that he needed. Massa champion for about 15 seconds before Hamilton came across the line. And we saw in the Ferrari garage Felipe Massa's father's face as someone rushed up to tell him, no, we haven't won. Hamilton has got the place he needs. That one will always stay with me. We'll be back in a moment with more here on the final episode of Formula One Debrief. Stand by. Lots more Formula One history to talk about here on Speed. We'll be back.
Up next on the final edition of Formula One Debrief, some of the most infamous moments of the past 17 seasons.
Here he comes, this is the battle. They have contacted.
Nelson Piquet into the wall heavily in his Renault.
That's where he pulled aside last year to let him by. But this year, let's see. He did! I don't believe it!
Wow.
I'm Rick DeBrule in Phoenix, standing in front of St. Mary's Church, which is where the old Formula One course used to go by back when it ran here in the late 80s and early 90s. Now, I was fortunate to host Formula One on Speed during 2002 and 2003, and there's two races that stand out. One, the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix. Rubens Barrichello, leading most of the way, had to pull over at the last minute to let Michael Schumacher go by because of team orders. All I can remember saying at the time was, I can't believe it. By the way, I talked with Rubens this past year. He remembers saying he couldn't believe it either. And the other race that stood out was the 2003 British Grand Prix. An amazing sight, something I've never seen before. Some maniac ran onto the course trying to make a political statement. Fortunately, he was tackled before anybody was hurt, but it kind of brought a whole new meaning to the word twisted kilt. And of course, the true high points, getting to work with David Hobbs and Steve Matchett. Could it get any better than that?
All right, thanks very much, Rick. Yeah, I suppose there have been plenty of lowlights in the past 17 years of Formula One here on Speed. Will, why don't you give us a couple of yours?
Okay, Michael Schumacher being forced into retirement, as I think he was back in 2006. You could see the look on his face after that Italian Grand Prix. We were in the media centre at the time, and we were handed a press release during the race, so there was no backing out for him at all. He was edged into a retirement, which I still believe he never truly wanted to take. Politics, though, runs deep through Formula One. It always has. I think it always will. And two men really have defined the political movement in the sport. They've turned the sport into what it was and had a very close relationship. Those men were, of course, Max Mosley and Bernie Ecclestone. Mosley's deposition from presidency of the FIA and Jean Todt taking over from him has weakened that relationship between the FIA and Bernie Ecclestone as commercial rights holder. And we wonder how long Bernie Ecclestone will remain in his position now as commercial rights holder of the sport. So much uncertainty over his future. So I think there's been a real changing of the political guard, and that's been a big thing.
And that'll be a story going forward.
Absolutely.
Because Bernie Ecclestone's legal problems worldwide are far from solved.
Well, I don't think he'll be there for longer than about 10 years anyway, because by that time he'd be 93. So I just think that somebody's going to be taking over the next 10 years.
I still believe Bernie will outlive all of us.
Right now he's having an automatron built of it. And since he isn't very big, it's fairly cheaply built.
Well, speaking of the FAA, I suppose one of the biggest headlines of a nasty sort in Formula One has to be the Stepney-Gate saga, when McLaren was accused of taking Ferrari technology and incorporating it into their car, and the result was a still eye-watering $100 million fine that miraculously McLaren and Mercedes were able and willing to pay.
I remember the one thing about that was a couple of years before, for the same rule infringement, it was when it was bringing the sport into disrepute and breaking those kind of regulations, was on the podium in Turkey when they made that sort of statement.
Right.
And at the time, $5 million. And it was so much controversy because $5 million was the biggest fine ever handed down in F1 history. And suddenly you get $100 million and it all looks very...
Well, you know, right on the heels of that was the incident in where Piquet Jr. was asked by his team, the Renault team, to pull aside.
Singapore, yeah.
A crash, an artificially generated crash. And that, too, spawned a whole series of bad activities. But they didn't pay anywhere nearly the same penalty.
No.
It's interesting, I mean, because it was so egregious, really.
And your former boss, Flavio, kicked out of the sport?
Yeah, a couple of guys paid with their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, all that you've talked about, I'm quite shamefaced about it because I know all of these lead characters. Mike Coughlin.
What do you taught them?
I taught them all.
You're the evil linchpin in the middle of this, aren't you?
When that $100 million fine was handed down to McLaren, I mean, I remember at the time being absolutely distraught. And the reason I was so upset was because Nigel Stepney, the man really right at the centre of that storm, was the mechanic that employed me at Benetton, gave me my break in Formula One. He went on to great things. He was beyond thrilled and excited to go to Ferrari. I remember that excitement, and we had a very close relationship after that. After I left the sport as a mechanic and started working as a journalist, along with Ross Brawn at Ferrari, and managed to keep that very close relationship. And when all this broke out, and Mike Coughlin, a chief designer at McLaren, also a chief designer I'd worked with at Benetton, were in cahoots about this. I was absolutely distraught. I didn't know what to do. And then on the back of that, the $100 million fine, and Max Mosley comes out and says in a press release, it's the absolute least minimal fine that we could have applied to them.
Doesn't it? It just all adds up.
It was remarkable.
I still think it's a ridiculous fine, because when you look at the SEC, there'll be some company that rips people off for like $500 or $600 million. They don't fine them $100 million. I just thought for a sporting code violation, some of which was probably a bit iffy anyway, because at the same time, the Renault guys had got...
Renault was also found to have data from another team.
Exactly,
in their computer system.
I've got to say one other thing, which I know a lot of fans, it touched a lot of fans, was the team orders issue. And that's something which has run the entire way through Speed's broadcast of Formula One. Was it legal? Wasn't it legal? Throughout all those years, Austria, Indianapolis. And then finally now we have some element of closure in that it is legal. And so we know where we're at, and they don't have to go behind our backs.
Right. How is it different, really, from what Ferrari did with Felipe Massa's gearbox seal on the grid for the U.S. Grand Prix in Austin, Texas, just this year? Or Michael Schumacher parking his car in Monaco during qualifying to bring out the red flag? Or Michael turning into Jacques Villeneuve at Jerez in 1997.
And I was all for that. I thought that was good.
And Michael doing this and Michael doing that.
That's right.
I mean, Michael was at the heart of a lot of things.
Yep.
You like the obvious thing to do to me at the time.
Everything taken right to the limit in Formula One. We've got another break coming up, and we'll be back with more here on a very special Formula One debrief.
And then...
Carnage everywhere! Red flag destroys most of the field here.
Oh my God.
Great start by Ross. Oh, and he goes back, flying over Rubens Barrichello.
Oh, no! Oh, that is a big accident. There's 3 corners written off the car.
Oh, we've got more problems.
That's been called
Fernando
out.
Alonso.
Be
His
careful.
teammate Jarno Trulli.
Really back another one. At turn 13, over track turn 1. Oh, huge crash. Kubica. Oh.
Wow! That is Mark Webber has gone over.
Oh.
That is an horrendous crash.
Well, from that dark weekend in 1994 when Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger were killed on the Imola weekend, Formula One cars and technology have certainly changed. We've gone from 12 to 10 to 8 cylinders. The cars have completely changed aerodynamically, the tires, the tracks. Everything about Formula One has changed so remarkably in the last 10 years. Think about our old Formula One Decade show when we used to sit around and look at 10-year-old Formula One races, and the first onboard shot showed a steering wheel with no buttons on it, and we all thought, wow, things have really changed an awful lot.
Well, obviously they've become much, much safer. There's been a huge push for safety, and the regulations, of course, they keep coming out to slow the cars down. And within a year or less than a year, the cars are right back to the speed they were before, whatever they seem to do to the cars. And of course, it's amazing how so much technology is on street cars today that is actually banned from Formula One. Whereas, of course, when Formula One started and all racing started, it was to improve the breed. When people, Gaston Chevrolet drove, I mean, one of the things he was trying to do was make his car better for street cars, and now they're taking some of the street car technology away because it's too advanced. But the cars have become much safer and they've become much more competitive.
They have, and as we're talking about at the top of the show there, the teams have become a lot closer as a result of that. If you go back, let's say, to Bob, you were just talking about the horrors of Imola in 1994, but if you go back just to the prior year to 93, when Williams had active suspension on their car, fully automatic upshifts, fully automatic downshifts, anti-lock brake system on the car, all of that, as you say, has been ripped away from the cars, traction control ripped away from the cars, and that gave certain teams, back then in that era, Williams a huge advantage. But if there is any good that's come out of Imola and the poor old deaths of Senna and Ratzenberger, it is to make the cars safer. The introduction of the FIA legality plank, take away downforce from the car, ever more stringent controls over the crash testing of the chassis, the adding of the padding to the driver's safety cell, all of that, yeah, they are much, much safer than they used to be.
But I miss terribly the lap records, the excitement of a new lap record being set and impossible speeds being achieved. And I noticed that Red Bull had Adrian Newey design an ultimate Formula One car using the technology of today. And this car looked so exciting that I got to say, I really regret that we're not racing a car like that. It had a closed canopy, it had faired front wheels, and they estimated that around the average circuit, they would cut 30 seconds off the lap time. But imagine that.
They also said that I believe a human being wouldn't be able to cope with it. The G-forces which would be experienced would be, without a G-suit on.
I bet if you built that car, you'd find a human being that would drive it.
Someone would drive it.
Yeah.
Felix Baumgartner, maybe. But yeah, you're right. I mean, while the cars have got safer, I think the circuits as well, we've got to look at how safe the circuits have become as well. Hermann Tilke has taken incredible knocks over the years for his circuits, but one thing that is clear is that these racing circuits are incredibly safe. The runoff areas, also the technology that we've seen in terms of the fencing now. Every area around a circuit is so much more advanced. It is designed with safety very much in mind, and that's why we've gone, touch wood, so long without a fatality.
Well, now that we find that the cars are so competitive and so safe, then the rules makers all decided, well, we need to find a way to make them more competitive in terms of overtaking. Let's make them less aero-dependent. So we come up with things like the kinetic energy recovery system and the DRS, the drag reduction system. And I have to say, they have worked. And they are fun to watch during the course of a race when the graphics come up and shows the battle. I mean, who could forget? And Spa this year, when Kimi Räikkönen took 2 shots to get by Michael Schumacher's Mercedes on the run down the hill because he found out that he was misusing the DRS. And once he got it figured out, he was able to get Michael.
Well, the way you can test the validity of whether those are popular decisions and successful ones or not is, would you go back to the old way, And I think once we sampled DRS, I mean, first everybody was bitching about how artificial it was and so forth, a gimmick. But would we go back to I
don't know. Maybe if you asked Sebastian Vettel only after the last race.
Last week
in Texas.
He was very vocal about not liking that. If there's one technology that I really wish we did have, and it wasn't really enforced by the regulations until it was over naturally, I just love the sign of the Ferrari V12s.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was just an era for me when I remember being in the Monaco pit lane with Ferrari and Camp just ahead of us, our Benetton pits were just behind, and the thrill of seeing the Ferrari mechanics fire up the V12 639, 640 era Ferraris, the John Barnard Ferraris with the V12 in the back, and just spitting sheets of fire out the back towards our mechanics that were watching in awe. I mean, that was just fabulous. Yeah, after that, the rules were changed and a V10 was mandated, but at that point, everybody had already decided to use a V10, and then the V8 came in. So, and I don't really like the V8s, quite frankly. I'd be horrified at the idea of the V6 turbo coming. I don't like that idea at all. If I could do one thing and go in reverse, give me back the ability to use a V12.
And the sound, I'll tell you, as a fan in the grandstands, as a kid, hearing that engine, oof.
Well, we certainly remember the look on Jacques Villeneuve's face when he drove his late father's Ferrari 312, I believe, at Maranello. He got the feel and the sound of that 12-cylinder engine. We got out of the car with a big smile on his face, and Fernando Alonso came rushing up. And he wanted to ask Villeneuve what it was like to drive that engine. We'll be back with more here on Formula One Debrief.
There it is. It's a lead change. Mika Hakkinen has taken the lead.
For the race
lead. He's got it. He's forced Schumacher right off the road.
Push. He's close. Around the outside. Wow. Oh, into the grass, but he hangs on.
Good gracious.
You've just seen some proof that, in fact, there is plenty of passing in Formula One. Gentlemen, I think one of the great myths of Grand Prix racing is that it is not competitive and that they don't see enough wheel-to-wheel action up in the grandstands. And yet, 500 million plus television viewers around the world and full racetracks in 18 or 19 countries around the globe would seem to suggest there's a lot to like about Formula One.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned the passing. What I think is so exciting these days is you are on board the guys as they're making the passes. You see how close those wheels get, inches away at 200 miles an hour. You see the virtuosity of the drivers, and you see the ambition and the aggression, too, because you don't find that on the street, people driving around like that. And I think it's fantastic that we're at last able to share the skills that were there with Fangio, with Moss, Clark, and everything, but now we're in the cockpit with them. I think it's wonderful.
That's a good point. The television coverage has certainly changed over the years, and that in turn affects, I think, the public perception of what Formula One is like. Gone are the days where, you know, the home country broadcaster was following their Formula One driver, even if he was running around at the back of the field all afternoon.
Well, I do think we've seen a lot more passing just in the last few years. I mean, I remember a couple of races in Turkey in that last right-left complex, and we saw so many people, wheels all muddled up with each other. And part of that, I'm sure, is because the cars are so much safer now, and the drivers know they're safer, and they kind of know that everything's going to be all right if anything goes horribly wrong. But we have seen a lot of not just with the DRS, we've seen a lot more passing, I think, in the last few years. And that's because the cars have got more parity and the circuits are safer, and it leads them to do things that they perhaps wouldn't do otherwise. But we've seen a lot of passing, I think.
And as you've said, the field of Formula One at the moment is one of the highest in terms of overall talent level. And when you've got that many world champions, that kind of quality, and the respect that exists between the drivers. I remember Jenson Button and Kimi Räikkönen going wheel-to-wheel in Austin, Texas, just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And that level of respect between the two of them was just wonderful, wonderful to see.
Well, Kimi Räikkönen going around the outside of Paul di Resta as they came down off that turn one into that very fast sweeping right-hander. And there wasn't much clag in Austin because the tyres were so hard and the track was cool. But the fact was he went around the outside all the way around that corner, and both drivers really did a fantastic job there. And we've seen a lot of passes like that in the last couple of years where people really, really do a good job. And the people that are being passed know that there's no good shutting the door when the horse is bolted.
I think, you know, when I look back through Formula One and my involvement in Formula One, we've always been able to pass in Formula One. I remember Patrick Head a few years ago when being asked by a journalist about the lack of passing in Formula One, he said, well, look, you know, the fundamental problem with passing in Formula One is if we qualify and put the fastest cars on the front row, is it any surprise to anybody that the slower cars start to drop back and the faster cars go to the front? But when you take one of those fast cars, and we've seen it recently with Sebastian Vettel twice, actually, one for the fuel problem that he had after qualifying, starting the race at the back. He is capable to walk his way through the back markers. We've seen it with Nelson Piquet in my time, I remember that, in 90 or 91 in Japan doing exactly the same. Senna, when he had the problem at Suzuka, working his way through the field. Michael, we've seen do it.
Right.
But, you know, it's always been there. But fundamentally, the fast cars are right at the front of the pack. They're always going to disappear off into the distance.
Well, Jimmy Clark was tarred with that brush. A lot of people said that he could only race from the front. And he was like Sebastian Vettel. He would do those dynamite starts. By the time they went around the first lap, he'd have a couple of seconds lead. But he got to the back in the Italian Grand Prix, and it'd be about 80, whatever it was, 2. And he came from the back and passed everybody. I mean, so there's always been passing.
Yeah, I agree.
And one of the corollaries of the cars all being so equal now is the fact that so much of the competition result is thrown on the shoulders of the pit crews. And how many times have we sat there and watched crews try to make 3-second or less stationary pit stops to get 4 wheels on the car? I mean, the competition goes on up and down in the pit lane, and it's absolutely fascinating to watch. At least we think so. And we'll be back with more here on Formula One Debrief.
The lighter side of Formula One with your favorite cast of characters when the final edition of Formula One Debrief returns.
Well, as veteran Formula One viewers on Speed know, we call the races from our studios in Charlotte, North Carolina. Here's a selection of pictures as we went through our final weekend, the Brazilian Grand Prix. From the control room to our meeting rooms to the studio where David, Sam, Steve, and I sat to call the race this weekend.
Well, you'll notice that there are no shots of me in the blooper category.
No?
I'm the most nearly perfect announcer you could possibly ever dream of.
And there's a group shot of our little crew that has carried Speed through the Formula One era for the last 17 years. You know, we can fix that, Sam. We can get a blooper in there for you. Welcome back to this special edition of Formula One Debrief. There have been some odd moments over the years, from the casual nature of the coverage of Friday practice to the more intense qualifying shows on Saturday, and of course, the races themselves on Sundays. But we have had our lighter moments, and here are a few.
Following the Grand Prix of Bahrain. Okay, yeah. Can I go on? Yeah. Okay, David said I can go on. With all the turmoil in that country, all we were hoping for really was an incident-free race outside the racetrack. We're still good? Yeah. Okay.
I'm Will Buxton. I'm in Monaco, mother. I'm in America, baby.
Great run for Lewis Hamilton, David.
Absolutely.
Well put.
To the golden era of the sport. Hello, team.
David, be aware that every other driver around you is faster than you. Can you confirm you've got that message?
I've got that.
He's heading for the water slide to join me and Steve.
Well, there we are. The first pit stop I've done in 8 years in a Formula One pit lane, and one of the few that I've managed to pull off without bursting into flames or being dragged down the pit lane.
Yeah, that was how it was, yeah. You're right.
And genuinely outclassing. Yo, this is Speed Live.
And you guys have been put up to this in order to make my life as miserable as possible, is that right?
We're just waiting to hurry up, Bob, because it is coming up to bar time.
Stick around. When we get back, we'll have a lick. Does that work for you? Is that good? How's that?
Hopefully Peter Windsor will have more to say than my esteemed colleagues. A couple of wankers. Of course,
you know. That left Kimi Räikkönen in a second, and you're all going to walk into my
And you completely forgot about how we get it across. You absolute mutant.
Yeah. Right?
I am not a performing monkey.
Very strong things to say about it on German. Oh,
okay. That would be the set falling apart behind us, but don't you worry. This is the internet. We'll just Photoshop that sucker right back in there, and we'll be like nothing happened.
This is Bo Derek. Can we interview her?
Oh, I'm absolutely amazed to meet you both.
She said if I cozied up to her, she would talk to me. And she looks lovely, very Formula One.
A third consecutive world championship. The battle, though, was... I will get this. I will get this.
Eagle Westlake car. Happy 100th, everybody.
I feel like an extra Monty Python in the Holy Grail wearing this.
You look a bit like a Monty Python in the Holy Grail.
You're all right, you are. Yeah, I like you. Thanks very much for your time, Bernie. Great to see you as always, and enjoy the race.
How ridiculous.
Well, thank you, Will, and thanks for the extra souvenirs for my partners here.
I think we're going to have some great racing.
Well, as we say so often, don't try this at home, kids. We are trained professionals, after all. I think the best line in that package is Bernie Ecclestone saying to our Peter Windsor, I have Bo Derek here. Do you think you could interview her? Could I? Another break coming up, and we'll be back with more here on the final Formula One Debrief.
The guys say their final goodbyes next on Formula One Debrief.
Mr. Steve Matchett,
It's Johnny Herbert here. You may remember me from a very long time ago, 1995. I don't think I ever said my goodbyes, did I? I think I was so wrapped up and upset with our mate Flav that I never got around to saying goodbye. And I know this is the last time for Speed TV that we're going to see you on it. And all I have to say is, Steve, thank you very much. See you again.
See,
the last show and you've had me over. I can't believe it.
For years
Well,
you've been
that's
complaining
fabulous.
about him leaving and not saying goodbye. Well,
From
there,
1995 to 2012, every year I've said, you know, Johnny never ever said goodbye after he left. Thank you very, very much, Johnny. I appreciate that. You can buy me a beer next time we meet.
There you go. We got that loose end wrapped up at least. Obviously, we all had a lot to say about the 17-year run here on Speed for Formula One during our final broadcast of the Brazilian Grand Prix. But now that we've had a couple of days to think about it, maybe there's something else you'd like to say, David?
Well, I had too much to drink last night at Frank Wilson's house, so I'm really hardly capable of saying anything at the moment. But, as Ayrton Senna used to say, it was the package. Whenever he got the pole or he won a race, he was always talking about the package, and Steve was always stressed how much, how important the team is to any driver. And us guys are the drivers, and we get the credit, but the fact is that ever since I've been working at Speed, there have been some wonderful, wonderful people behind the scenes that make it all happen and make the shows what they are. And I just want to say thank you to all those guys who've done such a wonderful job over the last 16 years, or 17 seasons, really. And without them, we'd look sort of a bit like you, really. Sort of like, you know...
Wrecked.
Wrecked, yeah. Wrecked 'em.
Yeah, well, for me, I mean, I can only echo what you say, David, but, you know, because of all those little vignettes we've seen and how much fun we have, to me, that's what strikes the chord. It's the collection of people that Frank Wilson drew together to build this Formula One team here at Speed Vision to Speed Channel and Speed, which has really gelled so well. And it's the chemistry, the natural chemistry, not just between us guys, and we all get on very well, I know that, but the guys, yes, behind the scenes, everybody, the help we get from everybody, and we're just the front guys here, the spokesperson. And when we see the finished show, it looks like we all know what we're talking about. The reality, of course, is far, far different.
We're just prawns in the game of life.
Will Buxton, how about you?
For me, it's just been a tremendous honour. 3 of the greatest years of my life, and that's been down to everyone behind the scenes and down to all of you guys, and from hearing from the fans over the last few weeks. And they've all been touched, I know, by what we've been able to bring them. And that, I think, is the greatest thing that really, what you guys have done. I've only been a small part of it. What you guys have done over the last 17 years hasn't just touched people's lives, it's changed people's lives.
Sam? I think the most amazing thing to me through the years has been the depth of emotion of Formula One, and we've all shared it and experienced it vicariously. I think of Vettel winning at Abu Dhabi in the night and his thrill at that. I think of Massa and his despair in Interlagos. But mostly I think of Mark Webber in that final moment when he finally won a race. You know, he'd been waiting for years and it looked like he might never win. And his pump in that car in Germany at the Nürburgring, the primal scream, summed up everything that Formula One is to me. The difficulty of winning and the sheer exuberant, uncontrolled joy of it when it happens.
Yep, 296 races, and we were reminded on each and every weekend just how much it matters. Well, that's about all the time we have here on Formula One Debrief. We'll let it to our colleague Sam Posey to offer our final goodbyes. For me, for David Hobb, Steve Matchett, Will Buxton, and Sam Posey, I'm Bob Varsha. Thanks for watching each and every week. So long, everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
There we go.
Yeah.
A pleasure.
Samuel?
Terrific.
Beyond the pleasure.
Yeah.
Beyond the pleasure.
Don't pull Sam over.
You still able to stand yourself, David?
Bob, thanks for the jacket.
Formula One is about cars and drivers and tracks. But more than anything, it is a state of mind, a day-to-day, hour-by-hour awareness of being part of something very special. Leaving Formula One is like a little death. Partly it's a sense of loss of things anyone can understand, like the traveling to places such as Abu Dhabi and Austin, Singapore and Spa, and being there with a purpose. And money. It means a return to real-world values. In Formula One, people amass great wealth with a speed that ignores conventional rules of economics, and teams operate on virtually unlimited budgets. If you need something, you get it. But to those losses you can, in time, adjust. Much tougher is not being part of the show when the lights go out. It really is that spectacular. The cars really are incomprehensibly complex. Ferrari's really that red. Pit stops really this fast. To have a role, big or small, in such a majestic production is to have your hour upon the stage. But when it's over, when your time is up, it's hard to accept that the show rolls on without you. Consider Michael Schumacher. He missed Formula One so much that he put his reputation on the line and came back. Nowhere else could he share the intensity of effort, that supreme focus on the job at hand that is the way Formula One operates. But the team thought they could do better with somebody else, and the winningest driver in history is out. Michael has driven his last race. We at Speed are airing our last Formula One show. You are watching the last moments of it now. Speed has been a team that was, in a very real sense, a part of the Formula One community. We've gotten up at 3 a.m. for races halfway around the world, and we put our hearts into making each show as good as we possibly could. But sooner or later, everyone's time in Formula One comes to an end, and ours has come now. What's left is for us to dedicate our 17 years of coverage to you, the viewer. Together we have shared the Formula One state of mind, and together we have gone for the ride that is racing's very best.